Hi, if you don't know me, my name is Kirsten, and here on YouTube I've been doing a little series that I've been calling Quick View with the Vampire, a series in which I review the newest Interview with the Vampire episode in the quickest and most efficient way possible. But as the season has progressed, and as I've gained a little bit more confidence in front of the camera, I'm still working on it, these videos have been getting longer and longer, thus making the quick part of Quick View pretty irrelevant. However, I don't want that to come across as I plan on stopping. I just want it to sort of be known and this sort of serve as a warning that these videos are going to start getting pretty long, and they will probably be pretty long from here on out, just about anything. So if you are looking for a little quick look, this probably isn't it, and this is probably a misleading title at this point, but it's fine. We're gonna work on that. I also, before I actually start getting into the video and talking about the episode, want to discuss two things quickly. The first one is that my other videos, I've had some issues uploading in the past. AMC/YouTube do not like that I have part of the episode playing in the upper corner, and it's been making it pretty difficult to get things uploaded. And they actually, about 5 or 6 days after uploading my episode 5 review, emailed me, removed the video, and then they removed like 6 or 7 minutes of it. I'm working on it. I think the visual aid is really important, and I think it helps make things clear for everybody. I think having the simultaneous auditory and visual aspects of it is a way that people can better comprehend. And so I'm trying to figure out, I'm very new at this. And so please have some patience with me as I try to figure it out. And this is kind of serving as a warning that this one probably isn't going to have a lot of the clips in the upper corner, because I'm really sick of YouTube trying to take it from me and making it hard. The second thing is that this video is going to be unlike any of my other reaction/review videos so far. If you've watched any of my others, you know that I have a system that I work with, and the system is sort of, I talk about favorite scenes, I talk about thematics, I do kind of like a fun thing I talk about, and then I end it with predictions. And while scenes and thematics and predictions are all going to be included in this video, they're not going in any particular order, because I cannot quite wrap my head around this episode, and I'm hoping as I start talking that it'll kind of make sense as to why. And I think a lot of people are actually in the same boat. But let me stop talking about the particulars and let's start talking about Interview with the Vampire Season 2 Episode 6, Like the Light by Which God Made the World Before He Made Light. So I apologize for this video being out way later than anticipated. I have struggled tremendously with episode 6 of this season, and I felt like an immediate video response would not do it any kind of justice. And with a show like Interview, I need to be making sure that I'm giving the episodes the justice that they should have. However, I don't want it to come across as the fact that I struggled with this, that I didn't like it, or that I don't think it's a good episode. Because truly, Interview with a Vampire, every episode is a 10 out of 10. Probably a little biased at this point, but it's true. I truly think Interview with a Vampire is one of the best shows, if not the best show of the last 10 years, if not the last 20 years. And every episode serves its purpose. The problem with that is that sometimes the purpose is just absolute sadness and pain, which is kind of like where this one fits. I think a lot of people will understand when I say Season 1, Episode 5 was sort of this episode for me last season. And what I've learned in watching Interview is that while every episode is a 10 out of 10, they're not always all rewatchable. And that's where this one fell into. I didn't want to rewatch it. Like, I was like, one time's enough. I'm done. I'm tired. I feel sick. I don't want to watch it. And yeah, that's part of been the issue. I didn't want to rewatch it, which is necessary for me to, put things together. But it is a wonderfully written episode that, again, serves its purpose. It moves the plot exactly how it should. But it is difficult to watch. Again, purposeful. But it's difficult to watch. And it's difficult to watch, I think, especially if you love Louis. And I don't know if it's come across in my videos. I bet it probably has. But Louis is my favorite character. And so, yeah, this was a hard episode. And so, yeah, in my attempt to better understand this, I've had to watch it through several times over the last couple days, and I'm still piecing things together. But I do feel a little bit more confident in my thought process on it than I did several days ago. But here's how I'm gonna kind of work through this episode today. I have 4 pages of notes here. They're a mess, and I know what they mean. I'm gonna work through those while I have the episode pulled up on my laptop. And we're just kind of gonna go through it in the order that it happens. Because while I do have a favorite scene, there is one scene that is an absolute favorite for me. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. I also have all these books that we're gonna be pulling out of at some point today. It's Interview, Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, Tale of the Body Thief, and Vampire Armand. This is probably gonna be the messiest video I've ever put out, and I apologize in advance, but episode 6 is what it is right now for me, and that's okay. So let's dive into it. Let's start talking about the first couple scenes and what happens. So for those of you familiar, our first scene, our music, is we have 2 things going on. We've got Daniel and Rashid and Raglan James. I saw Roland Jones, that's what happened. And Raglan James are at this diner. And then the other thing that's going on is Louis and Armand are in Dubai looking at the wall where the bacon triptych was. And I'm gonna start talking about Daniel first. So the first thing I wrote down is Rashid ? Talamasca ? And then I wrote Armand has to know. So let's talk about it before we even really get into the episode. There is no way Armand does not know that the Talamasca is in his house. I refuse to accept under any circumstance that that man is unaware that the Talamasca has files on Daniel's laptop and that Rashid is working for them. He is 500 years old. He is all powerful. There is zero reason for us to sit here and be like, oh, he doesn't know. Yes, he does. There's no way he doesn't. And I think this goes back to one of the overall questions that's sort of been weighing on everybody since season 1, which is, why is Armand letting this second interview happen in the first place? He doesn't want it to happen. And he's powerful enough to say, I don't want it to happen, so it's not happening. What's our goal here? I don't know. I can't wrap my head around Armand, and the more I've gotten into the season, the less I understand him, but also the more I understand him, but the less I understand him. Armand and I have a complicated relationship in the books as well, so this is actually really fitting. But yeah, we have Rashid is working for the Talamasca. That's crazy.
How did they get the tapes?
I love the way Daniel says Rashid's name. Hold on.
There was no postage on the package with the tapes. Rashid.
It's just funny every time. He says it 4 times. So yeah, that's my first take from this initial scene. And then Raglan comes in. And as they start talking, Daniel says, can you protect me? And Raglan's like, no, we are notoriously bad at protecting people. And I don't know if anybody's read The Witching Hour by Anne Rice. It's the first in her Mayfair Witch series. I read it for the first time, not this last January, but the January before. And it's a super long, it's 1,100 pages. It's a beast of a book. And there's a lot of Talamasca in it. And yes, they are very bad at keeping their own safe. There's one guy that has a really, really bad death in that I remember. But I think it's interesting because this immediately leads us into Daniel saying, I want to get out alive, which feeds back into what we saw last episode, which is Daniel has this driving force for life. And I think this is something that's a little interesting and that kind of diverges from the books a little bit, because for people that don't know the books, so this is Interview and this is Queen of the Damned, and Daniel's pretty relevant to these two books. And so what happens in episode 5 when Daniel's like, make me a vampire, like, you know, I won't waste it, I won't whatever. That's exactly what happens here, only Louis actually gets through the whole interview before it happened, not just to Claudia trying to escape to Europe the first time. And when this happens at the end, it's very much like kind of like I want to die to be like you. I want to die to be just as you guys are. And I think that's interesting because then when you get into Queen of the Damned, again, for people that don't know the books, we don't actually know Daniel's name until this book. He's just called the boy in Interview. And it's here that there is a chapter called The Story of Daniel, the Devil's Minion. And I'm going to clarify right now, I'm not like a Devil's Minion fan really that much. I'm like pretty indifferent. That's a very unpopular opinion. I don't really care, but this chapter is really fun. If you want Armand to be really hysterical, you need to read this because that man's gonna put weird shit in blenders and call Paris at 3 and then no person in particular, just Paris at like 5 in the morning. He's a weird little dude. I love him. But Daniel in this really wants to die. Like repeatedly is like asking Armand, like kill me and make me like you, kill me and make me like you, kill me and make me like you. And so our Daniel in the show sort of being the exact opposite of that, like wanting to live and being very adamant that he needs to live, is a really interesting thing, especially when you take into account the way that Daniel works sort of as a foil of Louis, but he also sort of works as a foil for Claudia. I don't know. Anyway, so the next thing I want to talk about in this scene is Raglan says it's all going to come out, talking about Daniel publishing this interview. And so he's basically telling us like, hey, like all this is gonna eventually be out and about, and it's better you that tells everybody than, you know, everyone finding out from the government or something. And this is a clear season 3 setup. It has to be a clear season 3 setup. We're not going to get to it this season. There's too much happening already this season. We still have a trial to get through. We have the post-trial. We have, you know, whatever's going to go down in Dubai and everything else. We got too much going on to worry about a great conversion, truly. So I'm just curious on exactly where that's going. I do think again that it's Queen of the Damned territory, but let's talk about that after the season ends more, when I have more time to sit down and go through it. The last thing to talk about in this scene is Raglan says a very fun little line, which he says, if I could swap bodies with you, I'd be running the order by now. So I said it in my video about the first time Raglan showed up, and I was like, I can't even deal with that right now. So let's deal with it now. So for people that don't know, Raglan James, Tale of the Body Thief is the 4th book in the Vampire Chronicles. And Raglan James shows up, and he shows up a couple times and everything, but the first like real interaction that he has with Lestat is on page 90 and 91. And he comes up to Lestat and he says like, I have a proposition for you. You'd be a fool if you didn't listen. It's something you want very much and no one else in this world can offer it to you, be assured. And Lestat's like, okay, well tell me what it is. And the guy's like, no, like you just have to wait, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So then Lestat basically figures out what it is, and he's talking to a character named David Talbot. I also don't like David Talbot that much. I have reasons though. And he's talking to David. I do like David at the beginning, actually. And they piece together that what Raglan James is saying is that he can switch bodies with people. And don't you want to be human again? Isn't that what every vampire wants, is to be human again? And the funny part in this is that Lestat goes to Louis to tell him. He's like, oh, I have this like great opportunity. And he like genuinely thinks like Louis is going to be excited for him. And Louis is just like, what is wrong with you? Like, Jesus Christ. And so like on 110 is where he's talking to Louis. And so Louis is like, but what about your body? He said, pleading with me, holding his anger and outrage in check so skillfully. Surely you can't place all your powers at the disposal of this creature, this sorcerer, or whatever he is. The others have told me that they cannot even calculate the limits of your power. No, it's an appalling idea. Tell me, how does he know how to find you? That's the most significant part. And Lestat goes, that's the least significant part. But clearly, if this man can switch bodies, then he can leave his body. He can navigate as a spirit for long enough to track me and find me. I must be very visible to him when he's in this state, given what I am. This is no miracle in itself, you understand. And they kind of go back and forth about, you know, what are the pros and cons of this? And Louis is like, please don't do it. Which, of course, means Lestat's gonna do it. And yeah, so anyway, Lestat ends up switching bodies with this guy, who of course immediately runs off with Lestat's body. And then Lestat realizes very quickly that he hates being human again. And he's like, oh, I need to find my body. The problem is that this guy now has way more power than me. So he's like, I need to be a vampire again so I can find my body. So he goes to Louis again and he's like, hey, I did it. It was bad. Can you make me a vampire so I can go get my body back? To which Louis is finally like, you know what? This is good for you, Lestat. Like, you get a second chance. Like, this is great, and you should do that. And I'm gonna just leave you alone, and you live your life. You live this human life. To which Lestat's response is to burn Louis' house down. It's fine. Just means they have to live together again. If you want like comedic Lestat and Louis, this book is honestly a trip and a half. But they're clearly setting us up for a body switch at some point. And I know there's been interviews that have come out the last couple weeks with Roland Jones talking about casting Justin Kirk in this role and possible body switching. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. But meanwhile, let's talk about Louis and Armand. So they are staring at this blank wall where their bacon triptych was. And this raises a couple questions again, like why are they selling it in the first place? Like what is the drive here? I don't know. But I think it's really interesting that Armand clearly takes the lead on, okay, well, we're selling this and we're doing this and we're changing this, we're buying this. When our flashbacks to Paris do show that Louis is the one interested in the art and Louis is the one interested in photography, and Louis is kind of the one with the eye. And if you even go back to season 1, like the townhouse decorations are largely Louis, because when Lestat first bought it, even before Louis was a vampire, like, you know, he's like, oh, well, come shopping with me, and Louis picking stuff out, and Louis, like, it's very Louis, and that's kind of his thing. So I think it's interesting that Armand is taking the lead on this. And then also when Louis finally, like, because he has an attitude right now, rightfully has an attitude. This is not me complaining about his Dubai attitude at all. But when he kind of like goes through it all, Armand's kind of like, okay, well, what would you do then? And Armand. However, I think the most interesting line from this scene is near the end of it. Let me find it. No, not there. But it's where Louis says, leave it bare then, wait for revelation to enter the room. Which is right at like about 4 minutes and 40 seconds into the episode. And this is going to feed into the next thing that I want to talk about, which then feeds into something I want to talk about later, which is this play that's being put on by the vampire Sam, who is our playwright. And the first thing to know about this play is that the conversation that Santiago and Quam are having on the stage as their characters is an exact conversation that Louis and Lestat have in the books. So on page 71 of Interview with the Vampire, Louis says, "I'm leaving you now," I said to him at once. "I wish to tell you that now." "I thought as much," he answered, sitting back in the chair, "and I thought as well that you would make a flowery announcement. Tell me what a monster I am, what a vulgar fiend. I make no judgments upon you. I'm not interested in you. I'm interested in my own nature now, and I've come to believe I can't trust you to tell me the truth about it. You use knowledge for personal power," I told him. And I suppose, in the manner of many people making such an announcement, I was not looking to him for an honest response. I was not looking to him at all. So this is an exact conversation that they're having.
Own nature now.
What do you think a vampire is? What a vulgar fiend. And I thought as well that you'd make a flowery announcement. Tell me what a monster I am, what a vulgar fiend.
I make no judgment of you. I am not interested in you.
So, exact conversation, which is really fun that they're having this, whatever. But if you go to, and I have these notes also so I can put stuff on the screen for you guys. 6 minutes and 28 seconds into the episode, there is a close-up of the script, and the script is called Enduring for Guido. I don't know what that word is because it's cut off. Battle with enlightening and puzzling ponderings. Something wanders in a world of time. A tragedy, a comedy, a tragedy, and a truth by Samuel Barclay. So I'm gonna be honest in saying that I kind of thought the Vampire Sam thing was like a joke. Like I thought it was like just like haha, we're having fun. And it turns out that I really need to like stop being dumb about it and acknowledge that these writers are very intentional in everything that they do. And Samuel Barclay, there is also a real Irish playwright, poet, and writer named Samuel Barclay Beckett. And that's literally who this is. That's like who this guy is. And this Enduring for Guido is clearly an early version of one of Samuel Barclay Beckett's most famous plays, which is called Waiting for Godot. And there's a lot to talk about with Waiting for Godot and Interview, and in particular like what it means for this episode. And I'll get into it more. There's a scene later where they're doing the play again, and I'll kind of talk about the thematics a little bit. But Waiting for Godot is crazy. It's a crazy inclusion. And it's one of those plays that I remember reading it in my college courses and struggling with it. It reminds me of like abstract art on a wall. Like I struggle with abstract art. And it was definitely one of those for me. But I weirdly think Interviews made it a little easier. But again, this is neither here nor there. It's just an interesting thing, and we'll talk about it as the scene shows up again. The next thing I want to talk about is Louis has a little bit of an attitude in Dubai right now. Again, rightfully so. I'm not mad at Louis' attitude in Dubai. I think he should be meaner. I actually like 99% of the time encourage Louis to be meaner to the men in his life especially. But it's so like, I just wish he was less passive aggressive, and I know that's like literally like Louis' thing. Like he's passive. It's like a root of his problem. But I just kind of wish he'd just full out just be like, why did you erase my memories, Armand? Why did you do that? And he's not just gonna come out and do that, and it's fine. Next thing is the vampires are passing around Claudia's diaries. Claudia's diaries have been a big subject of invasion of privacy since the beginning. Like, Louis allowing Daniel to read the diaries is viewed as an invasion of privacy by a lot of people, and I don't necessarily disagree. The fact that Armand has access to all of Claudia's diaries, I do view as an invasion of privacy, because, like, what do you mean? Why is he allowed to do anything with those? But also I know why, and it's fine, whatever. And the visit to Roger that happens as the vampires are passing around Claudia's diaries, which is basically them gathering proof of evidence that Lestat has been dead, and it will be something else that they can use at this inevitable trial that's about to happen. And it's also one of our first times, again, like we had it very briefly at the end of episode 4, but where they're saying, well, Maitre wishes to invite him to the premiere. We have to remember Maitre is no longer Armand. They're talking about Santiago. And that's just really important. The next line that I have written down is at 11 minutes and 13 seconds into the episode, which is where Armand is asking about Daniel, if he was left alone during the time that he and Rashid were out. And Louis says,
Love, you were not to leave Mr. Malloy alone.
He didn't. Stood by the hand dryer like a creep.
Why do you ask? Love.
Love. Why do you ask, love? It sort of goes into Louis' weaponizing of words, which is something that the writers' room talked about on Twitter last year. They did a big like Q&A, and they talked about it's the only power he has. It's the only thing he can weaponize are words. And he's saying love in this very like sarcastic, almost resentful kind of way here. And it's very reminiscent, sort of season 1, episode 7, when they're in the middle of the murder plot to kill Lestat. And he says something about like, oh, for you, my love, when like he's never called Lestat my love. That's like literally half of the root of their problem too. Is that like he won't say love. And so it's sort of, again, this like weaponizing of love, very much highlighting the fact in this case that like, no, like I really don't mean that right now. Yeah, Louis and love, I don't know. The last note I have here is that this is the last of Claudia's diaries. We're officially, as Daniel wants us to know and points out, we are officially working with only the things other people tell us about her. And her last entry is fuck these vampires, which is so good. So good for her. But it makes the whole trial process, I think, even more devastating, because we're gonna lose Claudia. We know we're gonna lose Claudia, but we lost her this episode too. Whatever little bit of her voice that we were able to cling to and be like, we have Claudia, is gone. And now we're gonna lose her fully. And it's just so sad. I think right now when I'm filming this video, episode 7 is gonna be airing in Australia in like 2 hours, which means it's gonna hit Twitter in like 2 hours. It's fine. It's fine. We're all fine. AMC, also, please work on your time zone understandings. Like, people have emailed you about this, and I know you know what a time zone is. And I know, like, I know what a time zone is, but it's airing like 16 hours early in Australia because you're releasing it on their Sunday. And then, whatever. Anyway. The next scene is Madeleine's sexual assault scene that happens. And okay, so first thing is, I haven't talked a lot about Madeleine. Again, not because she's not wonderful, but she's definitely a complicated character. And I know some people have been very uncomfortable with certain aspects of the character, and that's the point, I think, but it doesn't make the uncomfortableness less. So Madeleine is ostracized from French society. She is viewed as a Nazi sympathizer because she slept with a Nazi soldier. And I have to admit that I don't know a ton about France post World War II. I don't think that's unexpected. I know a lot about America, and I know a lot about literary movements post-World War II, but I don't know a lot about France as its own like entity here. And obviously every European country had its own way of dealing with a lot of like Nazi sympathizers and whatnot. And in France, there was this thing, and they were calling it the horizontal collaboration, and basically saying like women that were romantically and sexually linked to Nazi soldiers. And apparently there were like 200,000 births that happened throughout like the course of the years of World War II that were results of like Nazi and French women like being together. And I'm gonna mess up the pronunciation. I don't speak French. Femme tendue, which just means shaven women. And basically what happened was when the German occupancy in France ran out and everything, the French had their own way of dealing with these horizontal collaborators, as they called them. And one of the things, there were like 3 different waves of it, but one of the things was public humiliation, trial by mob, as Louis says during the turning scene with Madeleine. And they dragged these women out into the streets and they shaved their heads, and the public humiliation of it. And one of the things that happened was there was a lot of art movements going on in Paris and at this time, post World War II and also during World War II. And so there are a lot of photographs of this that went very, you know, worldwide, and that we have documented because of it all. And I think one, it's interesting that like the photographs exist just because now we can link Louis and photography in a lot of ways. Again, maybe that's something I can make more sense of later. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of like what's happening here with Madeleine, is that no one's letting her forget this. They are very much putting the reminders constantly there. They're going and painting the swastika on her window and reminding her of why she's so hated by them all. This does, however, lead into the scene. She finally like kind of retaliates against it, and it leads into this sexual assault scene, which then leads into Claudia coming in to save her. And I know like Immortal AMC's already posted like the video, and we've talked about it a lot on Twitter. And if you don't follow me on Twitter, I do talk a lot on Twitter about the show. Sometimes a lot of incoherent mess, sometimes actual things. It's not often, but sometimes. And it's very interesting just how heavily this scene mirrors season 1, episode 1 and the church scene. And again, done purposefully. Like the way Claudia is crouched over that body is done purposefully. The blood on her face is done purposefully. And there's more parallels than just the visual aspects. Claudia is giving Madeleine a choice. I know the turning scene isn't right here, but she's saying, here's what I am. And you are going to have the choice if you want to be with me and join me and be like this, which is something that Lestat gives to Louis in the first episode. And he's like, you just saw what I did. Like, you just watched me, you know, eat a man and also like, you know, bash another one's head in. And this is what I am. And this is, you know, how I feel and everything. And there's choice. And in the movie, it doesn't happen a ton in the book, but it happens a lot in the movie where Lestat repeatedly says, like, I'm going to give you the choice I never had. I'm going to give you the choice I never had. I think he says it like 3 or 4 times in the movie. And I think that's really interesting. And I think it's really interesting that Claudia and Madeleine also have like a pre-established relationship, which is also something that Louis and Lestat had. Like, they were friends, you know, like above all and everything. Like, they were friends at the end of the day, which I think is so interesting. And again, that's part of where it differs from the book. In the book, Lestat just sees Louis and is like, I'm gonna make that beautiful man a vampire, so help me God. You know, whatever. So I really enjoy this scene. I think arguably my favorite scenes in this entire episode are just like anything with Madeleine and Claudia. Or just Madeline, because my favorite scene is actually mostly Madeline, which is interesting. But yeah, I really like it. And I really like it, and I don't want to talk about the next part, which is in fact Louis' first scene in this episode. So Louis actually, for our Paris stuff, doesn't actually get introduced until right at about like 17-ish minutes into the episode. And he is, and this is like, again, Louis was where I struggled this episode. And the reason I struggled with Louis this episode is he's not acting like Louis. I remember, like, when I say I remember, it was like a week ago. I hope I remember. When the episode ended, I sat there and I felt like I didn't recognize who was on my screen during the Parisian flashbacks. Like, the only time I felt like it was kind of like, okay, maybe this is Louis, is honestly like right at the end of the episode before the betrayal happens. I'm like, okay, like, yeah, that's my baby. Like, that's Louis. He's there. Every other scene, I was like, I don't know who that man is. I don't know who he is. And I know that's the point. But he is acting manic. Like, absolute mania going on here. And I'm gonna read like the definition of mania just to make it clear exactly like where we're at. So mania, also known as manic syndrome, is a mental and behavioral disorder defined as a state of abnormally elevated arousal, affect, and energy level, or a state of heightened overall activation with enhanced affective expression together with liability of effect. During a manic episode, an individual will experience rapidly changing emotions and moods, highly influenced by surrounding stimuli. Although mania is often conceived as a mirror image to depression, the heightened mood can be either euphoric or dysphoric. As the mania intensifies, irritability can be more pronounced and result in anxiety or anger. The symptoms of mania include elevated mood, either euphoric or irritable, flight of ideas and pressure of speech, increased energy, decreased need and desire for sleep, and hyperactivity. And then I think it's interesting if you go down to like associated disorders, like reading about it. If you remember Daniel's very fun, are you schizophrenic, Louis? And Louis, no. Schizophrenic is there as like an associated disorder. Pyromania, I think, is like the fun one. It's listed as a disorder. Obsessive compulsive, bipolar, and obviously it said earlier like depression fits into it. And then just here's like the signs and symptoms. To be classified as a manic episode, while the disturbed mood and an increase in goal-directed activity or energy is present, at least 3 or 4, if only irritability is present, of the following must have been consistently present. Number 1, inflated self-esteem. 2, decreased need for sleep. 3, more talkative than usual or acts pressured to keep talking. 4, flights of ideas or subjective experience that thoughts are racing. 5, increase in goal-directed activity. 6, distractibility. 7, excessive involvement in activities with a high likelihood of painful consequences. Examples, extravagant shopping, improbable commercial schemes, hypersexuality, etc. Yeah, so like there's like basically all of those happening like right now. And what I think is interesting about this is we've seen aspects of this before. We haven't seen it quite like this before, but we have seen it before. And the 2 episodes that I feel like are important to talk about it with are season 1, episode 1, and season 1, episode 3. So in season 1, episode 3 is where, you know, Louis is running the Azalea, and there's the very like racist laws going into place that are targeting his business more so than any of the other men. You know, Fenwick and Tom Anderson. I kind of like, I miss Tom Anderson's like chaos. I really do. Yeah, I could do with some more Tom Anderson getting murdered on my screen. But the end of that episode, everything leading into like what it says here, excessive involvement in activities with a high likelihood of painful consequences. Like, I feel like that's like, you know, the fire that killed Claudia. Well, you know, killed her and then brought her to the Lestat and Louis. And he's very sort of manic there. Like he's doing things like when he makes like that sign that always goes viral on Twitter. And he shows it to Bricks and she's like, I'm gonna speak for everybody when I say that's a stupid idea. Like that's dumb. Why are you doing that? And he's just like, no, like we're putting it up. And like he logically, like if he were to step back, would know that everything that he's doing is just making everything worse. Killing Fenwick the way that he does. Not saying it wasn't justified. It was very justified. But the consequences, right? Like he's sort of manic there. And then, and it's funny because like LOUSTAT's also manic in that episode a little bit. Like they're a mess in episode 3. But then I also think about episode 1 and I think about him in the confessional booth and the way that he is sobbing, wishing for death. And it obviously, so much of it is centered around the loss of Paul, but also it's everything. The guilt that he feels for being like the businessman that he is, and for doing the things that he's done. And again, it gives us like Louis as this like morally like great character. Though he hates who he is because of all of that. And also now here he is again, he's like talking numbers and he's like, oh yeah, like Brett the Pitt. Sir, this is not you. You are an estate. And I just really struggled with it because like then again, and it's like, you know, part of this manic episode thing is seeing the ups and downs. And we're going to see the down and it's like everything that happens like with Claudia leaving and it's just like it doesn't feel at all like my Louis and he's not acting like him and I know that's the point. I know the point is that he's not acting like him. But I miss Louis and I'll talk about it more later. I have a part somewhere in my notes. Yeah, on like the next page where I'm gonna pull up actually like a Twitter thread that I made a couple days ago that I felt like I actually made some more sense than anything else. But let's move on. We're not talking about Louis' manic episode for a second and talk about Claudia and Madeleine. So they're sitting in the room and going over things and whatever, and like again Louis' anger, like when he comes into that scene, like he's like threatening like to break Madeleine's arms and everything, and like it's very unlike Louis, you know, like it's just, it's not him. There's a very interesting line of you were LESTAT's, now you're Armand's, and he's like, or Armand's mine. It's just very funny. I think Louis is very funny sometimes. He doesn't deny that he was LESTAT's, which I think is interesting. And I enjoy that he is trying really hard to pretend that he has control over about anything happening. And like, it's funny because Claudia, like you can tell she's just like, okay, like I'm not gonna argue with you. That's cool. Whatever. But you see him, he kind of settles a little bit in this scene when it becomes very clear that he's realizing he's losing Claudia entirely, that she's making a companion. She's gonna make this companion no matter what. I think the not LESTAT's blood is interesting. There's sort of this idea that we're all cursed to bear our father's names. And I think Claudia views herself that way a lot. And it's like, and it's funny that also like when the next scene, which is when they ask Armand if he'll make Madeleine, he calls her Claudia de LIONCOURT. We're all forced to bear the burden of our father's name. And Claudia is no different. Like she is forced to bear the burden of her father's name, born and forced to have his blood. And it kind of fits into the whole, like, you know, men oftentimes like they have children for like the legacy purpose, and Claudia is LESTAT's legacy, whether she likes it or not, whether LESTAT likes it or not, she is his legacy. Like yeah, like he has other fledglings, but Claudia is the legacy. Claudia is the one that's his actual child. Again, I love the maker-fledgling relationship. It's wild to me. The parental aspects of it, and especially because like LESTAT mostly only makes lovers. Anyway, so again, that's another video. But yeah, so this feeds us into the next scene, which is Armand shows up and is like absolutely livid that they're asking him to make Madeleine a vampire, and calls her Claudia de LIONCOURT because he uses the word manipulator, which like Armand, pot, kettle, you can't call anybody a manipulator, my good guy. Whatever. This does go into, however, my actual favorite scene of the episode, which is Armand and Madeline talking. This is my favorite scene of the whole episode. And this is when I really need to sit down and I just need to watch this scene repeatedly. But why I love this scene so much is Armand is so scared of Madeline. Like, he is scared of her. This little human girl sitting on the couch with like her little legs curled up underneath her, eating an apple with a spoon. We're all still trying to figure that out. I know Roxanne was going over it on Twitter. I don't know. He is so scared of her. She is so certain and so confident in who she is. And I think he resents her for that. I think he resents her for the fact that she and Claudia appear to have this kind of companionship that I think all vampires wish they had. Because Armand knows what he has with Louis. Like, in the back of his head, he knows that what he has with Louis is very complex. And while, like, the love is there, they're both so damaged and both so adamant to not fix any of the damage that they can't. Where, like, it's like Madeline, like, she knows she's damaged and she's okay with that, and she's like, and that's like kind of the point, like, we'll have each other and we'll get through it together. I think he really resents her, and I think he's very scared of her. And I just really enjoy the scene, and it's shot beautifully. It really is a beautiful scene. I love that this is the director of this episode, if anybody like doesn't follow the director stuff, is Emma Freeman. And if you don't know Emma Freeman has directed every single episode of The Newsreader. And so it's really fun, like, her coming in. I have wondered a lot, like, how does she feel about like having seen Sam as Dale, who is the love of my life and so awkward and talkative, and just like Dale's a yapper. Dale talks all the time. I learned this the other day. I was trying to do a screenshot of something from the newsreader, and I was like, my God, his mouth is just always moving. Like, I need you to sit still for 2 seconds. Where LESTAT has a lot of purposeful pauses. And sorry, there's a train. I live right by a train track. But I'm pulling up my phone because I want to talk about, this is where I'm going to read into a Twitter thread that I did the other day. Because I want to talk about Claudia and Louis in this scene. So they're sitting there talking while Armand and Madeline are talking. And Claudia kind of laughs, and she brings up the, like, imagine without the burden of me. And Louis is very cold. He's very, like, not looking at her. Voice much, like, deeper, slower than, like, it normally is, and, like, got him through the door, didn't it? And she's like, did you mean it? He's like, does it matter? And this is just more of the result of, like, that mania, right? And this leads us into a discussion where he says something about results or whatever, and she's like, results? Is that what you found when you were looking for yourself? Results? And so I'm just going to read through what I tweeted, and I'll put it on the screen too. But I tweeted, I do think it's incredibly interesting how Louis talks about LOUSTAT in season 1, episode 1. It's almost reverent. For the first time in my life, I was seen, and how he genuinely does become this soft, beautiful thing until things get bad, and then he becomes dissociative. But in Paris, that softness is very reserved, and I have in parentheses, I was an armored thing that spring and held close to his chest. And then that armor just strengthens and covers more and more of him as episode 4 continues, until the softness is entirely gone and he's coarser than ever. And then with the Madeline stuff, the dissociation hits at all new levels. There's no I was seen in Paris. It's almost entirely the opposite. And I genuinely wonder if part of the whole second interview is this attempt once more, just try it one more time, to find who he is, because it's very obvious that he doesn't know. then I said, I know I've said it before because I've talked about this a lot on Twitter, but Paris is kind of this like, okay, we're not on the run, we're not in the war, we're not drinking bad blood. I can try to be me. Only the opportunity to be himself never presents itself. The closest he gets is this photography thing that he does, and he's excited and smiling and feeling some sense of worth because he's creating something. But the other vampires mock it, and I have in parentheses here, I think it's very telling that he doesn't share his photography in Paris with Armand. We just have the briefest of scenes where Armand is in the apartment and comments on portraiture. We also have the scene where they're walking along the river, and Armand just mentions that the other vampires are fascinated by it, but they view it as him stealing moments from humanity, which goes into that like, mocking thing. And then the art guy crushes that photography dream, and even in Louis' anger, which he has always had, he turns to Lestat and he says, tell me what I'm doing wrong. And he listens attentively and softly to what is told to him. And it feels like that is the last time that we see Louis in Paris, because after that, Armand tells his backstory, and it's Armand's story that allows Louis to realize that Armand is not the teacher that he came there for, that Armand needs something entirely different than what Louis thought. And I don't know, I'm rambling just thinking about Dubai Louis' way of talking about LOSTAT and what it means. So I'm very fixated right now on this idea that Louis is just genuinely searching for who he is still. Because I don't think he knows, and I actually think he was kind of figuring himself out in New Orleans. And like, this is not me saying New Orleans was a perfect setting for him, because clearly like they had their issues, but I think he was figuring himself out in certain times of New Orleans, and he doesn't get that opportunity. You know, they kill Lestat and they go on the run, and they're in Eastern Europe, and there's no time to beat yourself. You're trying to survive. And then they get to Paris, and you know, there's really like, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to try, and he kind of starts, and then there's no time, there's no opportunity. And it makes it like the way that he says, like, for the first time in my life I was seen, and again, it's Dubai Louis saying that, that's a voiceover. So like our like modern day Louis is looking back on his turning in early 1900s with this reverence. And I think he so desperately wants somebody to see him again. And I do think Daniel sees him. And I think that's like kind of a part of this, is like, I think the relationship between Daniel and Louis is very important, because I think Daniel does see Louis in a lot of ways. But yeah, I'm very fixated on Louis trying to find who he is, because he's not himself. And this manic episode that he's experiencing in this is, you know, proof of the fact that he hasn't quite figured it out. I just don't think he's ever really broken out of this manic episode. I think he's kind of stuck in it in some way. Obviously it's not like this anymore, but I think we see it in, you know, last episode, San Francisco. Anyway, the next really important scene after we get into all this, I'm like way back in the episode now, is where, so after they kind of go through this discussion, we're back in Dubai, and it is outed to Daniel that Armand has never made a vampire before. So I wrote down a couple of things. So first thing is on page 274 of the Vampire Armand. Hold on. Loneliness will always inevitably press us to such things. Talking about making a vampire. But I was a firm believer that those we make ourselves will always despise us for it. I cannot claim that I have never despised Marius, both for making me and never returning to me to assure me that he had survived the horrible fire created by the Roman coven. I had sought Louis rather than create others. So that's like the first thing, like Armand and making vampires. Then in the Vampire Lestat, this one, page 248, he tells Lestat, Each time the death and the awakening will ravage the mortal spirit, so that one will hate you for taking his life, another will run to excesses that you scorn. A third will emerge mad and raving, another a monster you cannot control. One will be jealous of your superiority, and another shut you out. And the veil will always come down between you. Make a legion, you will always, always and forever be alone. And there's another line, I couldn't find it when I was looking last night for it, where he just like basically tells LOUSTAT, like, any vampire you make is gonna hate you. Hope you know that. You're cursed for it, damned for it, we all are. I mean, and if you know LOUSTAT's fledgling experience thus far, it's not totally wrong. But then the last thing is Queen of the Damned. And this is where, again, for people that haven't read the books, this is where things are getting fun for us in the show. So I told you about the Devil's Minion chapter, and I told you that Daniel desperately keeps asking Armand, make me a vampire, make me a vampire. Armand eventually does. Daniel is Armand's first and only fledgling in the book series. So I have page 76 marked in here, which is, let me go back to what Daniel says at the beginning of this. So Armand would smile, sometimes even laugh. Armand had a rich, beautiful laugh, always eloquent of gratitude as well as humor. He looked and sounded mortal when he laughed. Calm yourself, Daniel. Your heart's racing. It frightens me. Small crease to the smooth forehead, the voice for a moment deepened by compassion. Tell me what you want, Daniel, and I'll get it for you. Why do you keep running away? Lies, you bastard. Say that you wanted me. You'll torment me forever, won't you? And then you'll watch me die. And you'll find that interesting, won't you? It was true what Louis said. You watch them die, your mortal slaves. They mean nothing to you. You'll watch the colors change in my face as I die. That's Louis's language, Armand said patiently. Please don't quote that book to me. I'd rather die than see you die, Daniel. Then give it to me. Damn you, immortality that close as your arms. No, Daniel, because I'd rather die than do that too. But even if Armand did not cause this madness that brought Daniel home, surely he always knew where Daniel was. He could hear Daniel's call, blah, 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 blah. So then he gives in and he makes Daniel a vampire. Page 86, so 85 and 86. So basically it just ends with, this is like the beginning of like the turning scene. You are my teacher, Armand told him. You will tell me everything about this century. I am learning secrets already that have eluded me since the beginning. You'll sleep when the sun rises if you wish, but the nights are mine, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of as this continues that eventually it ends with... This chapter is so long, by the way. I feel like that's also important. Page 104 and 105. And basically it just ends like this. That's the end of this chapter. If you look, like, this is 104, 105, 106 and 7, and then we end on 108. And it ends with the turning of Daniel. Now Daniel goes crazy in the books after he's made a vampire, like off the walls crazy, and Armand basically just like drops him off at Marius's house and is like, I need you to babysit this vampire I made that went batshit. But this is interesting for the show because Daniel's not a vampire. Armand doesn't like making vampires. Armand actually says in the scene, he's like, well, it repulsed and repulses me. Yeah. Don't know what this means for Daniel for the future. I don't know. Are they gonna make him a vampire? I don't know. Because there's also like rules about like not turning like the sick or like anyone old. Like you're not supposed to be too old when you're a vampire. And frankly, Daniel's older than he like should be as a vampire. So I don't know. We'll see where things go this season. I'm kind of predicting yes on vampirism for Daniel, but he also just might die. He also, I don't know. We'll see. But 28 minutes and 48 seconds into this episode puts us at the next part of the Samuel Barclay Beckett conversation I wanted to talk about and Waiting for Godot. Okay, I'm not going to get into what Waiting for Godot like is entirely, because it's a play where nothing happens, which is what Santiago says on stage. Like, nothing happens, and so there's not much to like talk about plot wise. There's technically 6 characters in the play. There's the 2 main guys who are always together. There's 2 other guys that come to the scene. There's a boy, and then technically there's Godot, because mentioned all the time. And so again, like Santiago said, it's a play where nothing happens. Like, there have to be events for something to happen on the stage and like whatever. But like the point is that there's not. So post World War II, there was like a lot of art movement, and basically there was a lot of cynicism following World War II, which I think makes sense given everything. And basically a lot of people started writing about like hopelessness and meaninglessness and like contemplating human existence and everything, and what, like, you know, what are we and why are we here, and blah blah blah, like, you know, just real existentialism, things that happen when the world is doing what it did. But because nothing happens in this play, when you read a story, like when you read a book or you watch a TV show, in general things work in a linear fashion. And sometimes things like are a little non-linear, meaning they're not exactly going like event. Like interviews like that right now. We're in Dubai, but then we'll go back to New Orleans, then we're in Dubai, and then we'll go back to Paris, and we're in Dubai, and then we're in San Francisco, and then we're back in Paris, then we're in Dubai. But there's still something happening everywhere, and it's something happens that influences the next thing that we see. We're still following a narrative. Waiting for Godot is like a circular narrative. Nothing happens. You have the beginning thing, which is these characters are waiting on Godot. And Godot never shows up, so nothing happens. And then they keep waiting for Godot, and Godot never shows up, so nothing happens. It is just the constant cycle of it. Which again, I think if we think about Louis' line in the beginning of the episode of Let's Wait for Revelation to enter the room. Like, is Revelation ever going to enter the room? Is Godot ever going to show up? I don't know. Like, probably not. As our Vampire Sam says here, he can't. Like, he's Hope, and he can't be there. There's a couple things, though, that I think are really interesting with this play. First thing is, okay, so all the characters wear hats. There's like a little like segment with hats, right? And basically like the characters at some point start like changing hats, and it shows the hats are very much an identity for the play. And so when they switch hats, it's showing how easily like you can be somebody else, how easily you can take on things from other people. And when you think about like Louis and Armand's very weird shifty dynamics that they have going on any good day, I think that just makes a lot of sense. But I think like the 2 big things I want to talk about is, so the play takes place in one setting. There's no stage change of anything. It is in general a tree, maybe some bags. That's it. Like, that is the stage, a tree. And I'm hoping I can include it in this, but like, tell me that doesn't look like the reading room in Dubai a little bit. The singular tree that's just sort of there waiting, people waiting by it, waiting for something to happen. I don't know. Again, I feel like I'm not smart enough for this sometimes. But it's a singular tree. And Louis goes to this tree. It's in that little pebble pit where he goes when he's like having like a really bad anxiety memory attack. And it's like he's waiting, you know, for something, waiting for relief from all that he's dealt with in his life, waiting for happiness, waiting for something. And what's also interesting is that the 2 main guys, like, they're always together and they're always by this tree. And part of like what the play shows is sort of like all they do is wait. Like all they're doing is sitting there and waiting, but they have each other, and they're not always happy, and they're not always like having a great time, but they have each other. And I think this fits into like season 1, episode 2, and Lestat's speech about like the loneliness that vampires can feel, and that like as long as you have someone, you can get through it. Yeah, I don't know. I need to sit down and like go through it more, but I think the tree, I think the enduring through like a companionship-esque thing is really important. I think this waiting for revelation, the exchange of hats, the identity, circular narration, is all really important to what we're actually witnessing. And I think like we're seeing a lot of like Louis and Armand in this. They're in this Dubai apartment, and they're enduring together, and they have each other. Armand's terrified of being alone, and I don't think Louis is terrified of being alone. I don't think he knows any different. Whatever. Anyway, he's a lot smarter than me. We're on to our 3rd page of notes. But the other thing about like this play scene is it's kind of our first very public showcase of Armand's lack of power that he now has over this coven. Like Santiago sitting there like joking and like being like snippy and whatever about like Louis and Armand's relationship like in front of him, and like not really fearing the consequences. Everything with like, you know, talking about the play and like them kind of planning this play without the projections, which is like a huge part of their aesthetic, as Armand says. I also think Santiago facing the stage, like while he's on the stage, like he's an audience member, is like really telling in the sense of like, as we've seen at the end of this episode and in the previews for episode 7, the jury is the audience and Santiago is on their side, you know, so that's there. I wasn't totally sure what year we were in, and Louis mentions the Geneva Convention, so we're in 1949 right now, I think. But this also brings us into the next thing that starts happening, which is where Louis starts talking about there were weird crimes that started getting committed around this time. Like, you know, the men at the Eiffel Tower, which is so, when you look at the season 2 logo that they had, it's there. But doesn't this break like the 4th great law, which is like not revealing yourselves to people? Like, I know they're not fully revealing themselves, but like the men one was really weird. The men on the Eiffel Tower. Whatever, what do I know? The next scene, actually I have a fun story with this one. So this is where Louis and Armand are walking at SACRE-COEUR in Paris. And fun story about SACRE-COEUR. So I have a friend who, she's French, she lives there, and she went to go watch the filming. And so she's like actually, you can't see her, but she's like in the background of the scene. And that night we had like this big group chat going on where this was like November, I think. Am I right? November? I'll have to go back and watch the videos. So we knew about like this Louis and Armand like kiss scene months ago. Because she was like sending us, we had like all like 9 takes of it on our phones, and we were all up like all night and we could not quit talking about it. And we like just for hours, she's like, oh my god guys, wait, and she's like sending us stuff, and like things weren't loading because she's like literally like back there in the scene. And it was like one of the most chaotic nights of my life. We were up all night. And I still have all the videos saved on my phone, I think. I'll have to see if she would ever be okay. I know she's shared like 1 or 2 on Twitter before. But we like, they did like 9 takes of this scene, and we like kept trying to figure out like what was going on. We were all very wrong, by the way. We had no idea what was going on. That's a very, very important part of this. I'm trying to look and see if I can find it on my phone right now. Oh yeah. So like, where are they? This was November 8th, 2023. Again, I'm not gonna show you because I haven't talked to her about it, but like this was them filming, and it was like a whole thing, and this was very fun. It was a very fun night. And then she ended up meeting Jacob Anderson and Delaney Hales later when they filmed the scene that's in the first episode of this season where Louis and Claudia first get to Paris and they're standing like holding hands. She was there and she got to meet them, and so she's like, I turned around, Jacob Anderson was like right there, and she's like, it was terrifying. I'm like, I know, right? It's actually a horrifying experience when the most beautiful person in the world is standing behind you at any given point. But anyway, that's all I think of when I watch the scene, honestly, is I'm like, that was such a fun night. That was chaos, though. Oh my God. We were stressed. And we were very wrong. Like I said, we had all these thoughts on what the scene was. No context. We were just like, we'll figure it out. We were very wrong there. I do think the scene's really important when we think about Louis and babies. Louis and this desire to like have children is one of my favorite things. I'm not really secret about it. Like I love that Louis just like wants babies. And I know it's like way more complicated than that. And again, maybe I'll make a video one day when I talk about like the maker and fledgling bond, and then like in turn like Louis' desires being very different from that. Clearly, like he's so upset about the Madeleine thing, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason he's upset about the Madeleine thing. But Louis and babies, he just so badly is just like, let's just have one baby, just one, see what happens. It never ends well, but like it's always a thought. But let's get into, I think the end of that scene's interesting when Armand's like, are you like making me? Cause like whatever, and like you can tell Louis like does not want to like have this fight. Like this is not like one of these moments for me. He's just like, okay, like whatever, like whatever, I got this. Well, she doesn't got this at all. So it's such a, their dynamic's such a fun little complicated roller coaster. But let's get into the turning scene, because this is probably my second favorite scene of the episode. So one, I think again, making parallels with Louis and Lestat. Claudia's like says, look into the light, listen to my voice and whatever. And I know Louis is already a vampire at this point, but the beginning of season 1, episode 2, when Louis is this little hungry baby fledgling vampire and he's, you know, running around with Lestat, there's like a close-up of like electricity, being able to hear the hum of the electricity, and Lestat says, follow my voice, a single strand. And again, I just think it's interesting, like the parallels of Claudia and Lestat with turning the loves of their life into vampires is very fun. The scene itself is gorgeous. Madeleine's willingness to be a vampire is so interesting. Louis kind of like not trying to get too close, not trying to intervene in this being for them, because obviously Claudia would do this if she could on her own. She just can't. But Louis' voiceover that's going on in Dubai is beautiful, talking about Claudia and Madeleine and talking about, you know, this turning. And it's only when he's talking about them though, because as we see at the end of the scene, Louis was wrecked having made Madeleine, and this is sort of the lows of that manic episode that he's experiencing. It's brutal. This loss of Claudia, the loneliness I think that it brings on, and kind of going into like the Louis and babies thing. Like I think part of it is like Louis is traditional in a lot of ways, and like he wants a family. Like he's not just like, I want a baby, like I want a family. And he does this, he makes Madeleine entirely alone, really. Like there's no like, oh, this is like our child, like this is, I made her and she's taking Claudia away, I think, in a lot of ways. Where like when you think about the turning of Claudia scene, which is in its own a manic episode. Again, like they're not he's not thinking clearly with Claudia. But there's this idea that like he and Lestat are bringing this baby in together, right? Like they're bringing a baby into this world at the same time, and like it's their baby, like that's our baby, you know? And I just, there's something here, and it completely ruins him, and it gives us this like really tragic self-harm scene. And it's interesting because like, one, when he's going through her life, when he's drinking from her, he says like he sees her life, which makes me think like, what did Lestat see about Louis, and what did Lestat say about Claudia? Like what things does he know about them that they don't know he knows? Like, did he see baby Louis in like a memory, like how like Louis sees like little Madeline and everything? Does he see the trauma that Claudia experienced in her childhood? Not that she was ever out of childhood, but you know, younger childhood. I think it's interesting that Louis voices the turning of Madeline by saying, and I fed her the gift. Again, I know I talked about gift last video. I think the dark gift thing is so important. It's been mentioned by name too much this season to not be important. And then, of course, the maker-fledgling bond. Again, I've said it a lot. Love the maker-fledglings thing. And it's so, and this is kind of our first really good look at fledglings and makers can feel each other. They can't read each other's minds, but they feel it, like they know each other. They feel each other. And it reminds me of the vampire Lestat. When Louis and Lestat kind of reunite for the first time in the book. I'm trying to find where it is. Is it here? No. Is it this part? Yes. So page 456 is sort of this reunion of Louis and Lestat. And what happens is Lestat's putting on this concert that like is literally half of it is for Louis' attention. Most of it is for Louis' attention. And they're getting ready for this concert and like prepping whatever, and they're staying at this place. And this is what Lestat says. He says, and then the gradual awareness that there was a creature outside in the darkness, that I was hearing tiny physical sounds. Someone out there walking in the stillness, no human scent. One of them was out there. One of them had penetrated the secrecy and was approaching beyond the distant skeletal silhouette of the helicopter through the open field of high grass. Again, I listened. No, not a shimmer to reinforce the message of danger. In fact, the mind of the being was locked to me. I was getting only the inevitable signals of a creature passing through space. And it kind of like keeps going and blah, blah, blah. And then on page 457, well, bottom of 456 to 457, it wasn't afraid of anything, it seemed, just coming, and the thoughts absolutely impenetrable. That could mean one of the old ones, the very skilled ones, except the skilled ones would never crush the grass underfoot. This thing moved almost like a human. This vampire had been made by me. My heart was skipping. I glanced at the tiny lights of the alarm box, half concealed by the gathered drapery in the corner. Promise of sirens, if anything, mortal or immortal, tried to penetrate this house. On the edge of the white concrete he appeared, tall, slender figure, short dark hair, and then he paused as if he could see me in the electric blue haze behind the glass veil. Yes, he saw me, and he moved towards me, towards the light. Again, traveling just a little too lightly for a mortal. Black hair, green eyes, and the limbs shifting silkily under the neglected garments, a frayed black sweater that hung shapelessly from his shoulders, legs like long black spokes. And then, of course, there's a very, like, even our memories can fail us. He was proof of that. Delicate and blinding as a laser as he came closer, all the old images blown away like dust. Yeah, and this is like Louis and Lestat's like reunion. But as you can see, like, he can't hear him, but he knows it's him. Like, he knows that it's made by him. He knows who he is. And so I find Louis' like response to, like, the way he says, I can feel her, there's almost like a horror in it. Like, and again, I think this just all feeds into the manicness of it, because he's sitting there, he's sliced his wrist open, he's made himself vomit up all the blood of hers that he can, and he's saying like, Claudia left, I did not care. This happened, I did not care. He is just absolutely lost right now. And again, I don't think he ever has gotten out of it. Like, I think our Louis in Dubai is still, I think he's trying to find out who he is. He's trying to find something. I think he's waiting for revelation to enter the room, you know? I find it very disgusting that Armand says in this scene, you'll find your way back to each other. Talking about Lou and Claudia, given everything, everything that we see. I find Armand moving in without asking to be not very maître of Louis at all. Good job. Then Armand's whole thing with the coven and like, I left the coven, they gave me a choice. Gave you a choice? Armand and I are fighting right now. I just hope everyone's aware of that. And I just really like, I need Assad Zaman to not be as gorgeous as he is, because it makes it harder to be angry at him. Beautiful people get away with things. It's so frustrating. Okay, the Dubai confrontation about memory. We have no proof that Louis asked for that, and we'll never know. Louis doesn't know. Nobody else was there. We know that Armand's already erasing people's memories on like a good day. So I don't know. Like, we don't know. We have no proof. And I just frankly don't trust Armand at this point to believe that that's a thing that happened. Like, Louis says, I would never do that. I would never ask for that. But then like, there's this like, did I? Oh my God. And like, Daniel was like, it's like when you're friends with this girl and she's dating like the worst guy and he does like the dumbest, worst thing and they break up and you're like, oh, thank God. And then like 2 days later, she's back and she's like, he apologized. And you're like, girl, don't do that. It's literally Louis and Daniel. Like, Daniel's so like, Louis, get up. Louis, get up. I keep finding it interesting how much Armand has like kind of, I failed Louis once and it wasn't in San Francisco. I'll never make up for it. So and this is where we know San Francisco, like we know what happened. So he's saying that that wasn't a failure. So it's like, okay, well, what's the failure? Well, clearly it's something in Paris and it has to do something with Claudia, I'm assuming. I don't know. I also get really angry in the scene because like Armand apologizes to Daniel and it's a very sarcastic apology. I get that. But apologies to Louis. Ooh. Swear to God. Okay, so then we are at the betrayal scene, okay? Betrayal. It's a wild little scene. Okay. I don't even care about the fun part at the beginning. I just don't. I'm sad and I don't want to talk about it. So the first thing I want to talk about, but we're going to focus mostly on Armand during this. Armand is the only vampire that we have seen that can stop time thus far. We see it. Wait, no, Lestat does it. Okay, Lestat and Armand are the only vampires we've seen that would stop time thus far in the show. Which implies to us that this is a hugely like powerful thing to do, because Lestat's incredibly powerful, and I don't know if the show is going to dive into exactly how much power like he really has, but I know like it's discussed in season 1 that he was withholding like a lot of the power to kind of give Louis this illusion that like they were more similar than they were. So I refuse to accept that anybody else stopped time. That was Armand. Armand's the only one that can stop time in this scene. The Judas kiss, really interesting. Louis and Armand have a Judas painting in their bedroom in Dubai. We see it in episode 1. And obviously like the Judas kiss, a betrayal, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Louis yelling for Armand, like we don't hear it, you see it. And it's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. But I want to talk about the Judas kiss because he's not Judas. Armand can't be Judas. Armand's too powerful to be Judas. Armand is God, in this sense. Like, God knew Jesus was gonna die. Father, why have you forsaken me? God knew. He's not Judas. He's putting on the mask of Judas, trying to be like, I was just this poor person and I will never atone for what I've done, when he was God the whole time. Anyway, let's talk about the kidnapping scene in the book. Because it's really interesting, like, I love it. We're getting a full trial. We're getting a full, like, extended long trial. In the book, the trial is very quick. It's not really a trial. It's basically like an execution. That's not even, they're not even pretending it's a trial. It's an execution. But basically what happens in the book is on page like 264, 265 is when, all this kind of starts to happen. And it's very much the coven, like, coming. And what's interesting to note here is it does say, and as soon as we were dragged into the Théâtre des Vampires, I was crying out for Armand. I was let go only to stagger on the cellar steps, the horde of them behind me and in front of me, pushing me with menacing hands. At one point I got a hold of Celeste and she screamed and someone struck me from behind, and then I saw Lestat. Armand's not in this scene in the book. Armand very, like, conveniently, like, disappears and then conveniently shows back up. This is, again, in Louis' perspective, to rescue, like, Louis, right? So this is a little different. We have Armand being very involved at the beginning of this, but he's very much like his little face of despair as he's waiting for Santiago to come and take them. And I do think what's interesting about all of this is, like, I do think Armand has questioned, like, clearly, like, if Louis loves him and how much Louis loves him and stuff. And while I think Louis and Armand have a very complicated relationship, I do think Louis loves him. I think it's complicated, and I don't know if he's, I don't know if I'm wording this right. I don't know if he's, like, in love with Armand as much as he, like, loves Armand. But I think it's really interesting that the scene is framed around the idea that, like, literally they're talking about Louis loving Armand. And if you look at it, like, Armand has everything that he wanted right now. Like, he has Louis, he has, like, he's away from the coven, and he is giving it up. And I feel like that face isn't just, like, the face of, like, I feel bad for betrayal. I think it's almost like I ruined everything that I had. I ruined the good that I had. I ruined this. Like, it's awful. And then that leads us into the reveal on the stage. So Madeline looks really out of it on the stage. Madeline is a baby vampire. She's been a vampire for what, a couple months. She can't stay awake. It's daytime. And I think this is also interesting because the trial by mob, which is something she's already experienced. We have Louis and Claudia on stage, and as the new clip has shown us, their Achilles tendons are sliced so they can't run. It's brutal. I'm absolutely dreading episode 7 right now. It's gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. Everything's fine. It actually ends there and everyone's happy. But last thing I want to talk about is Lestat. Lestat's had the trial. What's going on with that man? Okay. So again, for people, if you watched any of my other videos, I've talked about Lestat in an interview. And he shows up on page 265 at the trial, like I said. And he very immediately is like, I told you I wanted Claudia, the child. She was the one. And now I saw his head moving involuntarily with his outburst. Lestat, I said, you're alive. You have your life. Tell them how you treated me. No, you come back to me, Louis. And then he repeatedly, like on page 267, he says, she did it to me, Louis. She did it. You didn't. She has to die. He very much like condemning Claudia, like from the get-go. And it looks awful, and you're sitting there going, Lestat, that's your child, whatever. And it is, it's true. Page 438 of the Vampire Lestat. He starts talking about the trial from his point of view. So first of all, he talks about how he had to recover enough to even get to Europe. There was a lot of recovery time. Now look, in the books, they like throw his ass in a swamp and then they set him on fire. Like, He's really going through it in the book. He doesn't go through it quite as much in the show. He's a little better off. But so he finally manages to travel, and his first thing is, I turned to the only one that I could turn to, Armand. Armand, who lived still on the land I'd given him in the very tower where I'd been made by Magnus. Armand, who still commanded the thriving coven of the Théâtre des Vampires, which still belonged to me. After all, I owed Armand no explanations. And did he not owe something to me? So he shows up to Armand, and he's like, hey, blah, blah, blah. And at the bottom of 438, he says, my scars were puzzling to him. Talking about my scars were puzzling to Armand. They were too numerous, too intricate. Scars of an attack that should have meant death. I felt sudden panic that, in my confusion, I'd reveal everything to him, the thing that Marius had long ago forbidden me to tell. But it was the story of Louis and Claudia that came rushing out, and stammering in half-truths, sans the one fact that Claudia had been only a child. And he says, I don't want to stay in Paris, Lestat said. I don't want to trouble you or the coven or at the theater. I'm asking for a small thing. And he's asking for blood. He's asking for an infusion of Armand's blood to heal him, because Armand's old and powerful. And a long moment passed, and Armand said, tell me about this Louis again. The tears rose to my eyes disgracefully. I repeated some foolish phrases about Louis's indestructible humanity, his understanding of things that other mortals couldn't grasp, and carelessly I whispered things from my heart. It wasn't Louis who had attacked me, it was the woman, Claudia. Which in the book is true. The slicing of Lestat's throat in the show being done by Louis is a change. So they like kind of keep going and like all this other stuff, and page 440, like we go through it like pretty quickly. Like there's not a lot of spending time on it, but Armand throws Lestat in a dungeon and doesn't give him food and keeps him starving. So, and finally starvation as I lay on the floor of the brick-lined cell, unable even to shout curses at him, the darkness full of the vibrations of the passing tram cars, penetrated again and again by the distant screech of iron wheels. Sometime in the dark I discovered a mortal victim there, but the victim was dead. Cold blood, nauseating blood, the worst kind of feeding, lying on the clammy corpse, sucking up what was left. And then Armand was there, standing motionless in the shadows, immaculate in his white linen and black wool. He spoke in an undertone about Louis and Claudia, that there would be some kind of trial. Down on his knees he came to sit beside me, forgetting for a moment to be human. You will declare it before the others that she did it, he said. And the others, the new ones, came to the door to look at me one by one. Get clothing for him, he must look presentable, our lost lord. That was always his way. And it ends with, like, on page 441, it was a mob of monsters, white-faced demons shouting accusations, Louis pleading desperately, Claudia staring at me mute, and my saying, yes, she was the one who did it, yes, and then cursing Armand as he shoved me back into the shadows, his innocent face radiant as ever. But you've done well, Lestat, you've done well. What had I done? Borne testimony against them that they had broken the old rules? They'd risen against the coven master? What did they know of the old rules? I was screaming for Louis, and then I was drinking blood in the darkness, living blood from another victim, and it wasn't the healing blood, it was just blood. He talks about like the death a little bit later. I had Claudia's bloody yellow dress in my hands. I'd seen her in the narrow, wet place where she had been burnt by the sun. Scatter the ashes, I had said, yet no one moved to do it. The torn, bloody yellow dress lay on the cellar floor, and now I held it in my hands. They will scatter the ashes, don't they? I said. Didn't you want justice? Armand asked, his black wool cape close around him in the wind. And then this is where in the books, like, Armand lies and says like, oh, Louis is dead, and then he tells Lestat, tells Louis, oh, Lestat's dead, and they like think they're dead for like a really long time. And then Armand shows Lestat off a tower, the very, very famous tower scene. But he wasn't listening to me, and it didn't matter whether or not he was listening. He was drawing closer, and in a dark flash his hand went out, and my head went back, and I saw the sky and the city of Paris upside down. I was falling through the air, and I went down and down past the windows of the tower until the stone walkway rose up to catch me, and every bone in my body broke within its thin case of preternatural skin. 2 years passed before I was strong enough to board a ship for Louisiana. So this trial is coming up. I know Lestat's on the stage. I know he's gonna look like a villain. The point is he's supposed to look like a villain. You're supposed to be mad at Lestat. Like, I'm gonna get really irritated because people are gonna get mad like at Louis for like, why didn't you believe Lestat? Why would he believe Lestat? He has no reason to believe Lestat right now. That's the point. We're not gonna know about any of this probably till season 3. Like, at least in general, not till season 3. Like, the point is that Lestat is the villain, and rightfully so in some aspects, and in the aspects where he's not, it's because we're in a limited perspective. We don't know any different. If Louis doesn't know any different, we can't know any different. And you can't get mad at Louis for not knowing any different. There's no reason. I'm fully anticipating a lot of people being angry at Louis, which is where this is coming from. But anyway, I know this isn't a review, really. Episode 6 is wild. This is me trying to make sense of it. I don't know if I did at all still to this day. I don't know if I made sense of it. But it is, as I'm finishing this video, 12:41 here, meaning in an hour and a half, the episode's gonna hit Australia. So this video probably will be up after the episode is hit in Australia. Yeah. I don't know. We're about to enter like the craziest time. I think these next 2 episodes are going to be wildly painful in ways that I don't think we've ever quite experienced in the show. And we've experienced some like pain. I remember vividly sobbing hysterically during season 1 finale. So I'm really looking forward to this one. It's going to be a good time. Yeah, so I know this is not my normal video. I wish I could say that this is organized to some. It's not. I know this is a mess. If you've watched this, thank you. It's a lot of me just trying to piece things together for my lovely little vampire babies. It's a lot of me coping with the trial. I'm truly not at all prepared for the trial right now. I'm kind of really dreading it. But this episode bothered me. My Louis wasn't Louis, and I know that was done on purpose, but it doesn't mean I wasn't really sad about it. I've said it in multiple videos. I think part of the end of this season will be this like idea that we're getting like New Orleans Louis back. And again, I don't mean all of New Orleans Louis. Obviously he's had to have grown since then, and New Orleans Louis was also not perfect and happy all the time. But I think we're gonna get him back. I think we have to get him back. And I think he's gonna start really like learning who he is because of this interview. I think we have Daniel to thank a lot for it, and that's why I really hope that Daniel doesn't die and stays in Louis' life, because I think that might be one of the most important relationships Louis ever had, is this relationship with Daniel. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the episode. I know a lot of people were bothered by Louis, and again, it's not like a criticism. It was done on purpose. You're supposed to be bothered by it, but again, that doesn't always make it easy. Let me know what you think about it, though. Let me know what you think about our upcoming and impending trial and Lestat and Louis. And I'm gonna beg anybody that's watching this video, please do not get mad at Louis for not believing Lestat or not like questioning things. There's literally no possible way for Louis to have known. I need you to remember how powerful Armand is when we get into all of this. Like, I'm begging you. And don't get too mad at people that are just show watchers that are mad at Lestat. They're supposed to be mad at Lestat. Like, I think that's one thing that's really interesting on Twitter is like book fans, they'll get so angry that people are like mad at Lestat. And I'm like, I get it. I know like you've read the books, but not everyone's read the books, and like they don't have to read the books. And like, you're supposed to be mad at Lestat. Like that is the point. So don't get too mad at people who are angry with him. Like, they're kind of supposed to be angry with him. But don't get mad at Louis. I'll come for you, because I don't have patience for being mad at Louis. It's different. That's my baby. But yeah, if you watch this, thank you. It was chaos. I promise I'm normally way more organized than this. And the train is telling me to quit talking, so I'm going to end it there. And I will see you guys hopefully much sooner for a review and maybe more organized reaction to episode 7. Yeah, we'll see.